Okay, good morning, everybody. How are you doing this morning? Good. I won't do what they did to you this morning, make you say it back to me, okay? Glad to have you here with us today. My name is David Murillo. I'm the pastor of St. Paul Lutheran Church here in San Antonio in Southtown. And my name, David, means beloved. So we can see if the doctor, Victoria, wants to share what her name means. Victory, right? I think maybe? Perhaps.
That's my first name for sure, and that's my English name.
Okay.
My Hebrew name is Ruth Shandell, or Ruth.
Oh, beautiful. There's a story there. Beautiful. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming. Glad that you're here with us to join us in this discussion this morning, in this lecture from Dr. Harris. I'm going to give a brief introduction to her. We're glad that she's with us this morning. Dr. Harris is a board member of the NAMI Board of Directors. We heard from her CEO this morning, a lovely talk. She's also the board member for NAMI local chapter in Spokane, Washington. She's also a rep for NAMI Peer Leadership Council. She's a retired psychiatrist who has lived experience. She is spent years writing and delivering service grants focused on marginalized and disenfranchised people. She's provided service in jails, prisons, and she's also helped develop pharmacy formulas and other policies concerning care of incarcerated detainees. She's published in numerous journals, articles all over the place. She earned her master's in public health from the University of Washington, Seattle, and her MD from University of British Columbia, and I think in Victoria, BC. So with that, would you please give a warm welcome to Dr. Victoria Harris.
Good morning, and thank you, Reverend. It's true. I have been very fortunate and attended a lot of formal education, but that's actually not the focus this morning. This morning I am really honored because what I'd like to do is share with you the overlap between, it's the overlap between spirituality, religion, and mental health conditions. But I want to do it in a way that looks at the research and in a way that looks at what we know. We're going to come to stories and experiences towards the end, and those are critical, but I don't want to take blind leaps. I'm not comfortable with that. I have too many wrinkles on my face. I have too many scars on my leg. I'm not taking any more blind leaps, folks. So, what we're going to talk about this morning is ways in which our spirituality and religions can enhance or can impair mental health conditions. So I want to start out by looking at why we're gathered today. And one of the main points is to share some knowledge and some experiences. And this talk will be about 40-ish minutes. And the rest of the time, I'm going to turn it over to the facilitators. And they're going to take your questions and your comments. I think that that's crucial in a format such as this. Before I share the current research, there's two pieces that need framing. One has to do with faith, spirituality, and religion as part of a continuous cycle. And the other has to do with looking at mental health conditions from the benign or annoying to the potentially life-threatening. And I want to come back to that, folks. When I say mental health conditions that are benign or annoying, I am not underestimating their importance. What I mean, and we'll get to those, is that they're not life-threatening. I'm going to draw a bit of a line there. All right. Then we're going to spend some time reviewing the results of a 2020 meta-analysis on the research of what we're talking about this morning. And then we're going to talk about the limits of the research. We're going to hit the heart of the meat of the session, and that is we have a very strong foundational model in the biopsychosocial model in terms of remission and recovery and remission from an acute mental health condition. I think we're missing one of the foundational pillars, and I'd like to talk about that. And then, as I said, we're going to close out with some of your comments and questions, and that will be facilitated. So, As always, when I'm speaking, as I said, I'm thankful and I'm humbled to be here. Today's talk doesn't contain specific images or concepts that would be generally disturbing to people. That said, I'd like everybody to please take care. Please don't let anything I say or refer to trigger you. We're going to be looking at the manifestations or outward expressions of faith, spirituality, religion, and some of the manifestations of acute mental health conditions. And since we're going to do that, we're going to also be looking at some of the potential criteria around how do we as a group, how do we as individuals and then as a group decide whether manifestations of our faith are within the spectrum of healthy or helpful? What criteria are we using for that before we then opine on it? And of course, anybody who hears me speak on these kinds of issues, you're going to hear a call of action at the end. That's the purpose, right? We're here, we're going to gather, we're going to share some information, some experiences, and then we're going to go forward in action. All right, so the first frame that I'd like to talk about, faith, spirituality, and religion. In traditional parlance, faith, spirituality, and religion are thought of as discrete entities, maybe building blocks stacked on each other. In the conventional way, may be thought of as a pyramid. In this view, faith is often at the bottom of the pyramid, as a foundational block, and religion is at the top. And I have to tell you folks, you're going to hear pieces of who I am as a person, not just professionally presenting this morning. I was talking to my rabbi about this talk, and her first comment was, "They're going to knock religion right off the top of that block, koof." And I said, well, dear Rabbi, that's not the frame that I see it in. I don't see it as building blocks in a pyramid. I see faith, religion, and spirituality as a continuous cycle, actually of both personal and community development. Faith can be viewed as a core concept, core set of personal beliefs, spirituality being integral to the soul or the spirit. It's the state of being. It's a state of being. And religion is viewed as a social organization around the spirituality, so my state of being, and my core spiritual beliefs. But in the slide up there, what you see is that these concepts are arguably better symbolically viewed as overlapping shapes of various sizes. Spending a minute, and arguably best in balance, faith, spirituality, religion, best in balance. What happens when they get out of balance? Well, here's some examples. Faith that is out of balance can result in blind trust to an idea or a group, where the only thing of importance is agreement to the stated code. That's when faith is disproportionately represented, potentially. Spirituality that isn't balanced with a framework to create action or the belief that action matters essentially results in undirected or unfulfilled feelings. Spirituality being the spirit of being. So if you don't do something with that energy, you end up unfulfilled. In addition, religious practices that are based in fear and not based in trust, I'd like to suggest that those are out of balance. So we want faith, spirituality, and religion in balance. Please don't think of them as pyramids, not for this particular talk. It doesn't fit well. So that's the one frame that we need. Here's the other frame that we need for this morning. I want to talk about mental health conditions on a spectrum, from the benign to the catastrophic. And again, folks, I'm using the word benign, but that does not imply that it's unimportant. Something can be both benign and important, all right? So examples, fears that don't affect daily life. I don't do well with spiders, but I'm really lucky because I don't live in an area where I have to deal with them on a daily basis. Likewise, transient mood changes that are minimal, that last less than a day, those are typically benign. All right? Those are examples of benign mental health conditions. Moving to the other side, the potentially catastrophic side. Substance misuse, disuse disorders, the major mood disorders, anything that profoundly affects somebody's ability to work, love, play, and arguably engage in a spiritual practice goes over to the other side of potentially catastrophic. We also have the impaired reality testing illnesses. By those, typically diagnoses that I'm referring to are schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder with major psychotic features. Those are major illnesses where people experience breaks with reality, potentially catastrophic. All right. So with those two frames in mind, let's turn to what the research does show. All right. Okay, folks, you are all very bright, experienced people in the world. This is not surprising in that religion and spirituality have the potential to either improve mental health conditions or to impair mental health conditions. All right, we have that. We can all go now. We can all extend our coffee break. All right, and that is actually reassuring. And I'm going to come back to that point because there is a point where, with research, where if it doesn't make sense with conventional wisdom, then we have to sit down and look at it from a whole different perspective. And the fact that the research, the peer-reviewed public research shows what we think is conventional wisdom is actually is important. It lends credence to it. So what do I mean where there's potential to improve mental health? I'm talking about areas of religious coping. Well, what's meant by religious coping? That generally refers to how somebody interacts with their religious community. Remember, religion is an organizational piece. So when you see that, religious coping, what we're usually talking about has to do with interactions with the leadership and the elders within that structure. Likewise, community and support. Phenomenal potential benefit. Positive beliefs. Beliefs about what? Beliefs about self, beliefs about other, and beliefs about the world. Right? So our spiritual and religious entities have the potential to improve mental health conditions, just from those three areas that I've talked about. Likewise, the potential to impair mental health. Negative religious coping, because we enter into organizational structures, and we enter into them as our true selves, but as I'm going to talk about, we bring forward some scripts and some histories that then impact what we're doing. Likewise, there is endless opportunity, as I think of it, for misunderstanding and miscommunication. In addition, let me end on the last one, the belief system, self, others, and the world. Religious organizations, the groups, we have a chance to positively impact those three views, or we can come down with very, very negative views. And as many people know, when you're in the middle of an acute mental health episode or you're recovering, you're vulnerable. And you take in things that you're not able to filter as well as you might otherwise. And so when you hear a comment about, perhaps these people are all bad people, I'm generalizing, it's easier to take that in when you're in a period of acute remission because you're busy with other things, actually. All right, let's focus on the potential to impair for a minute. I want to look at the issue of practices and beliefs within a particular religion. The issue is to practice the rituals. You really do need organization. You need cognitive organization, and you need, many of the rituals have actual specific pieces or things involved. So you really do have to be organized to be able to conduct them. Well, what if you're driven to do that, but you don't have that level of organization? Then you miss the ritual, and let's start talking about the self-judgment and blame that's inevitably there as well. That's a really hard thing. And this is where many, many, many of the formal psychiatric diagnoses will come into play. Let's think about this for a minute, because I've listed some of them, folks. Anxiety, depression, people who are caught with terrible obsessive thoughts, followed by the compulsive behavior cycle, people who turn to substances. Those are major groups that are going to have trouble organizing. Those are people who have symptoms from those illnesses that are going to have trouble organizing practices and rituals. Another area where these rituals where people can have a lot of difficulty with the rituals are where they are time-bound rituals. Time-bound. What do I mean by that? Here's a really easy one for me to pull out for lots of reasons. Tonight, 5 o'clock, and it's an advertisement. Tonight, 5 o'clock, the lobby. Rabbi Kinberg, who did the opening this morning, and I'm honored. We're going to do the three blessings that are done at sunset. Jewish blessings. We do them over candles, wine, and bread. That's a time-bound ritual. It's around sunset. And there's a whole bunch of things around that. So that's just one example of a time-bound ritual. Another one, rituals that are organized according to dates. You have to be ready. You have to get prepared, and then you have to show up, and then you have to be ready. If you are in the middle of recovering from an acute mental health crisis, or somebody very close to you is, that just complicates everything. It just does. All right, down the slide. Misunderstanding and miscommunications. I talked about family scripts being forward. We see this all the time in community. We bring forward what we have and that which is unresolved. And then we place it on our leaders' laps. Sorry, Reverend, but it's what we do. All right. Oh, wait, I have to go back. Negative beliefs. I've already talked about self, other, and the worldview. The other thing to sort of pause at, and we do this all the time. We do this as humans all the time, and we do this whether or not we're spiritual or religious people. If you're in a disagreement with somebody, watch yourself and listen to the other person. Who's the first one to refer to the higher authority? Well, I heard so-and-so say, okay, so that's the name. That goes above the I read. Okay, and then you say, well, this person who is even more respected, that we both agree, said this. All right. Folks, we're talking about the platform of religion and spirituality. There is almost no other higher authority if you want to say this is the way you should behave and you should think, right? Refer to the higher authority. That can get people who are vulnerable and fragile in a lot of trouble. All right. Well, how does spirituality and religion improve mental health conditioning? You look at the other side. The positive religious coping piece, this is actually the art of practicing while achieving. So you kind of have to be happy and satisfied and okay with what you're doing while trying to be better. And that's the inspiration that religion and spirituality can offer people. In addition, it does help and encourage and provide direction and focus and an external organization. Our religious organizations often provide us with calendars, and they tell us when to show up, and they tell us what to bring for the potluck. And maybe we're even lucky and get assigned by last name or something, so we don't have to figure all that out. There are structures that do help. The community and support, I'm going to turn to the NAMI piece of You Are Not Alone and Yana. That is entirely within the religious structures, as well as this issue of pain and suffering in perspective. And that's important because as an individual, it's important that I know that my struggles are important. It's also important to me to put my struggles in relation to what you all are going through, or some of you are going through. I can only do that by being in community. Positive religious beliefs are results in action and will bring people into connection and community. Oh, wait, did I skip too many? Nope. All right, so what do I mean by all of this? Well, the brain doesn't have discrete buildings, it doesn't have discrete regions like buildings in a neighborhood. And that's important because parts of our spirituality and religious expression are reinforced by parts of our brain. And it's not like going from the ritual practice of my brain to the, now I'm going to go and learn some language of my religion, to now I am going to go and listen to music that is indicative of my ethnic culture. It doesn't work like that. There's cross connections between the pleasure zones, between the executive functioning zone, your frontal lobes. Here's where it is really interesting and important, folks, and that's the connections between the motor cortex, the motor strips of our brain, and the sensory strips of our brain, and the vision strips of our brain. Those pieces are all firing when we are engaging in spiritual and religious practices. So this is actually one of my favorite slides, only because it's got some pictures on it. So what you have, no, I can't operate this, it's a funny angle. What you have with the diagrammatic brain is areas of the brain that have been mapped according to function. Well, wait a minute, Dr. Harris, you just told us that the brain doesn't work like that. And it does in the middle. But look at the edges, folks. What about where the motor cortex, the motor strip, meets the sensory strip? They touch each other. And I'm only showing pictures of the surface, all right? So what does this all have to do with anything? Because I really believe that our behavior during spiritual practice in our religious communities, in fact, it causes repetitive neurotransmitters in our brain to be released. And in fact, that what we're doing is stimulating multiple parts of our brains over and over and over again. Some of you may go to church. How do you feel when you sing or hear other people sing? Well, you're singing, that's the motor cortex. Sensory, you're listening, that's your sensory cortex. Maybe you're looking around, maybe you're looking at your book, that's visual. Executive functioning, hopefully you're singing the same song as everyone else. You get my point. And I do want to be clear, though, that that's my hypothesis, that neurotransmitters are being released repetitively as the repetitive behavior is experienced. Okay, after my hypothesis, let's go back to the research, and let's talk about what the research shows. So, I want to look a little more specifically at some of the published papers. In 2020, Botek and colleagues in Poland sent out a questionnaire to colleagues in 6 different universities. I took their paper and added it to a 2021 meta-analysis that was published in a World Journal of Clinical Cases. So what I'm talking about is an amalgamation of a report of 147 studies that included almost 100,000 people, at least when looking at depression and anxiety. And there's some reasons why folks with depression and anxiety came forward. Let's start with they're the most common illnesses. All right. I'll talk a little bit more about the power of the studies and therefore what we can reasonably learn when we get there. But again, the results are generally in line with what you would imagine. Depression is generally helped by a rich spiritual life, but the results for anxiety are mixed. And that makes sense to me, partly again because of the rituals and the practices and the issues of essentially having to show up. If you have an anxiety disorder, one of the 7 anxiety disorders, just even contemplating showing up sometimes is enough to set off the physiological reactions of anxiety. Depression's generally helped by a rich spiritual religious life, but the problem is that suicidality generally lowers with a robust spiritual religious life. Here's where it segregates out. It falls on the laps of our leaders, though. Yeah, okay, we're going to come back to some comments.
Are you on the right slide?
Am I on the right side? No, I'm not. Thank you very much. Back to what the research shows. Whoever said that, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, back to the research. All right, I'm so busy with notes and slides. Thank you. All right. Okay, so we talked about suicidality. The results are mixed for OCD. Obsessive compulsive disorder, it's also mixed. And again, I've talked about some of the reasons why, because there can be a drive for perfection in the mental health condition that is just not possible in real life. Pausing on the psychotic disorders for a minute, it depends. The influence of spirituality and religion on psychotic disorders depends. If religious delusions are present, the prognosis is dimmed. Because what happens is somebody who experiences strong religious delusions will perhaps, potentially, come into a religious institution and have those delusions fed, and they become bigger. And then at some point, it's not going to fit with the organization. All right. The non-psychotic religious beliefs are generally associated with better outcomes. So what do I mean by that? These might be people who are experiencing psychosis, but their religious beliefs are not a part of that. So it may be centered on family members or food or the environment, but for some reason that organization, that religious organization, has stayed out of their delusions. In that context, the organization, their beliefs, generally helpful to people. It's noteworthy, and this is a nod towards prevention, actually. It's noted that spirituality and religion might be actually a buffer against post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah, who said wow? Yeah, that is really a wow. Let me say that again, folks. There's some evidence that a robust spiritual and religious life is actually protective against symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And for those of you who are interested, I can talk a little bit more specifically about where that came from. Here's the thing. This is a mediation for psychological growth because it provides hope. It means that we might be able to teach and infuse people with some resiliency and be able to lean on our spiritual beliefs and our religious institutions to actually do that. All right. Let me just make sure I'm on the right slide. No, I have to speak first. All right. This is some limits of the current research. Here's the thing. The sample populations, despite being 100,000 total people, the populations of the studies were limited. These were mostly university students. And there's reasons for that. We're going to come into some of the reasons in a minute. It's really hard when clergy and our faith leadership are so busy doing all their work to then say, hey, would you participate in this major survey around, okay, so we have some participation things. We can talk about the stigma of being recognized of having a mental health condition. This survey, the questionnaires required that people land on one side of the fence or the other, and if you said, yes, I have a mental health condition, you then self-reported. So when I say things like depression in general is helped by spirituality and religion, that's because people who said they were depressed said it helped, okay? We didn't talk to people who might be depressed, but they didn't say they were, right? Or maybe they were depressed and they didn't say it didn't help, right? So there's some issues there. Here's the other thing. The information depended largely on quantitative data. It was yes, no, do you belong, do you participate, do you have a mental health condition, do you take medications for it, that kind of thing. What they were not able to do was collect a group of people and sit them in a room and say, so, what do you think about this? And get comments. Another slide on some limits. The issue around funding and administrative support for these kinds of surveys, for these kinds of studies, that's critical. And it's critical on multiple levels, folks, and here's why. Without the funding and administrative support, we cannot engage our religious leaders because, as I said, they are far too busy and occupied with lists and lists and lists of things that they must absolutely do that have already not been done. So to come in asking for participation in a study like this without some kind of support, I completely understand from a researcher's perspective why there has been apparently a bit of a limited body of participation. The studies do not land on this issue, and it is critical. I have family members coming to me. I see it within my temple community, and I see the leaders within my community struggle with this. At what point does behavior tip from helpful and fulfilling to not helpful? And I don't want to irritate some of you, but I'm going to go as far as to suggest that there are times when behaviors can go to abnormal, right? I'm going to use the big abnormal word. How do we know that that what a person is doing is outside the bell curve, if you will? We're going to come back to this over and over and over again, and it has to do with connection. And what does it look like? It's not the behavior per se. It's, does it bring the person into community? Does it isolate them further? Is the community able to join with the person? Or does it isolate them further? We live in the construct of a society that most people can find a community. If somebody is in a community and is behaving in a way that is becoming progressively isolated from that community, that behavior's not helpful. That's the line, right there. before that, hopefully, because we don't want to exclude people. All right, what are some other problems with the research? Unable to discern the effects of confounding variables. Things like, what was people's level of social connection before they became ill? And so it's much easier to return to a place of social connection than it is to never have been there. They weren't able to slice that out of the results, if you will. Pro-social action-based behaviors. I don't know, you're with a group of people, they decide they're going to pick up trash from a park, you're part of the group, you pick up trash, you deposit your litter where you are, maybe you even put it on your phone and do that whole how much trash did I collect thing. How can you not feel a little better at the end of that? That's pro-social connected behavior, and that's often action stemming from our spiritual and religious communities. They weren't able to slice and dice the results of that kind of thing either. Okay, but what does it all mean anyways? That's the question. Let me jump to this, folks. Dr. Engel, George Engel, in 1977, I think, was the doctor who first suggested the biopsychosocial model. And he was an internal medicine physician, but when you read about him, he was one of these brilliant people who had his area of expertise, but could just draw stuff in. And he's the one who said, this is a helpful model, a biopsychosocial model of illness, recovery, remission. Many of us are familiar with it. So under the biological components, we have things like age, gender at birth, genetics, things like that. Psychological, we have mental and emotional components, and under sociological, we have things like interpersonal relationships and social support dynamics. When I cut to the chase and when everything is all done, I really think that we need to add spirituality to that domain. Biopsychosocial, spiritual model. I think that by leaving that last foundational pillar off, I think that we're leaving out an enormous potential to help individuals, to help families, and to help our community move forward. How do I see spirituality as offering a unique domain? Well, beliefs, rituals, and daily life examples of the beliefs. It has to be a call to action. All those other three domains, bio, psychosocial, those are static domains. I mean, they talk, some of them are like fixed. Your age. I am the number of days I am old. But spirituality, that is an evolving domain, and the evolving portion of this is actually around the call to action. It provides a potential frame for managing the good, the bad, and the ugly that happens in life as I look at it. It provides a potential frame for recognizing the past, for being able to live in today, and for being able to have anticipation and future planning for tomorrow. The other thing that this does is, if adding spirituality, it really underscores the need for connection for health. The other three domains, there's overlap, but they almost stand alone. This one doesn't. This one requires connection and requires community. So what are some of the implications of adding spirituality as a domain? Well, it legitimizes the research and it opens the funding. And when I wear that particular hat, I really like that. It will also increase shared language. It will increase the mental health language among the spiritual leaders, and it will increase the spiritual religious language. And I think my slide says allopathic. Yeah, it does. Allopathic medicine. That's somebody like me trained as a physician, as opposed to a naturopathic medicine, naturopathic physician, or as opposed to a chiropractic physician. So allopathic physicians, I know I trained in the last century. I did. I trained in the last century. But even today, the language around spirituality and religion is almost lacking, folks, in our medical education. And that's critical. I've just laid out this whole talk about how important that is to people and to their physical well-being and to their mental well-being. So by adding this domain, it increases language. And that again is important. I'd like to point out that adding this domain does not imply which belief system is the best. Okay? And I'm making that explicit. It does allow for the next level, and that is belief in action. That's where it all comes down to. So I want to go back a bit. Our current state of knowledge, I provided a couple of frames. I gave you some research reviews. And I provided some direction of where I think we should go, but current state of knowledge, what does it mean? It's untapped potential. As long as we stand on those three pillars, the pillar of spirituality, looking at mental health conditions, remission, recovery, it's untapped potential. Here's another piece, folks. Components of spirituality can be taught. Again, remember, spirituality is my being. It's my beliefs in action. And we teach these to people. We teach people belief in action. I talked about picking up litter. That's belief in action when you do it with intent. So we can teach pieces of this. How can we teach it to more effectively address the issues of mental health conditions? That is where the question is. All right, intervention strategies, really quickly. On the left-hand side are all the caveats. Because as soon as you start with intervention strategies, people start with but. I've given them to you. You can add your own, but I've given them to you. The appeal is intervention strategies. Basically, the appeal is a drive to health. That's what you're doing. You're meeting the person on a level where they want to be healthy. The caregiver care, that's primary. If we're going to step in and say, okay, spirituality is a domain for mental health remission and recovery, then we have to look at care for the caregivers. We have to talk about the difference between empathy and sympathy and remind ourselves that interventions are simply tools. They're not a reflection of the worth of the person who is offering them, and they're not a reflection of the worth of the person who doesn't pick them up and use them, okay? They're just tools. And that the most important is the unconditional offer of hope. All right, all those caveats aside. What are the intervention strategies? Mobilize and connect. That's it. Mobilize and connect. Start where the person is, mobilize. Start where the person is and connect. There are multiple levels of where people are at and multiple places that people can go. Keeping it simple, mobilizing people. Why? Why is that so critical? That's the way to bring people back into themselves and to then connect them. Connect them with themselves, their family, their community, and their beliefs. So, in summary, today I talked a little bit about some understanding of the impact of spirituality on mental health conditions. I talked about faith, spirituality, and religion as developmental stages in a continuous cycle. All realms of belief easily affected by mental health conditions and vice versa. You've heard me say, hopefully loudly and clearly, that I believe spirituality should be added as the fourth dimension to the biopsychosocial model, and why that should be. And I think that this entire discussion leaves us wide open for possible room for interventions and moving forward. Thank you very much.
That was great. Thank you so much, Doctor. That was wonderful. So real quick, before we go to Q&A, if there's questions, I have an announcement to make. That was a couple people asked about CEUs for this particular session. I don't think there's a scanner thing to scan out there. So if you are interested in CEUs, please go to the info desk downstairs. Let them know the session you sat in. Oh, is that it right there? Okay. Is it on the screen literally right now as I'm talking to you? Okay, next time get me, dude. All right. Yeah. Okay, we got it. Okay, never mind. There you go. CEUs right there. Go ahead and scan that, and I'll give you a moment. And while you do that, let's give it up for Dr. Harris one more time in that really stimulating talk. That was wonderful. Thank you. I have a lot of notes. There was a lot of data, a lot of processing, a lot of good things to think and talk about. But why don't we do this? Let me just throw it out there to you guys. Comments, questions for Dr. Harris vis-a-vis the fourth dimension of spiritual added to what we're talking about here. Go ahead, yes, sir. And I'll repeat the question for the recording.
In the slide you had up with the three intersecting circles, in the psychological one, it had, there, right there, belief and expectation, but that doesn't incorporate everything you're talking about.
Yes, my friend, you have that absolutely right. So the comment is, yeah, very quick. You were also, yeah, very quick, very good. So under the psychological component of this, you'll see the line beliefs and expectations. And yes, I am very much suggesting that the spirituality domain is different. I see these beliefs and expectations are separate them from the spiritual and my faith for a minute. Those, if you can, but those are the things that I come forward in the world with. When I get on the bus, do I expect to be treated decently? Do I believe that I am safe walking in my neighborhood at night? Do I believe that I can safely ask somebody for directions? Those are, you're absolutely right. I see the belief component of the spirituality domain with a capital letters, if you will.
Okay, different than the one that's...
Does that help?
Yeah, yes. I just wondered why what you were talking about did not fit in there.
Thank you very much.
We'll come over here.
Hi, how do we as a community or as leaders encourage clergy or institutions that teach clergy how to better equip themselves as mental health, in mental health? So for example, I'm not in clergy, but I went to seminary and I took a class on pastoral counseling, which just opened up my life in terms of my own childhood and future work, being here. But I think a lot of our clergy leaders, a lot of our pastors don't have that. So how do we as a community, because they are oftentimes the first line that people come to with all of their drama and trauma, and they themselves are overwhelmed and sometimes misdirect people.
Great question. Oh, that's to me?
Well, yes, sir, you're the facilitator.
Yeah, okay, well, I thought the doctor's running this, but yes. So I'll just give one little note, right, as a pastor in this community. I think it's so important, and are there faith leaders in here? Are there people that are pastors and clergy and spiritual people? What I really found so helpful today, because I mean, in terms of the institutional thing, I think our seminaries, our denominations, our structures need to do a better job of coming to terms with this plight of mental illness that is now upon us, right? After COVID, I think all of us are quick to this, right? In fact, our church is a part of some work being done right now here in San Antonio with the H.E. Butt Foundation for churches to be frontline places where I as the clergy, we as the staff, we're not going to pretend to be clinicians, but what we do is we're that mediating force that then selects them, talks to them, serves them, and then gets them in the door to the professionals. So just an awareness, I think, is key. But I'd also say this, and this is to kick it over to you, Doctor. I love the beginning of your talk, and this is a frame for me to think about moving from here, is how the spiritual can be, basically, it can help or it can hinder. It can impair or it can, make things better, right? how do we, and so for the faith leaders in the room, people who have gone to seminary, how do we, as people, or just believers, how do we analyze that when we're talking to people, right? Because you mentioned the blind dogmatism in the beginning. How do we need to check ourselves in terms of conversations with people to make sure we have this open posture that isn't going to lead with this blind dogmatism, but instead hear where they're at for the sake of where they're at?
I think that's a really important comment because, and so I'm going to tie it to what you were saying. One thing I heard you say is language and concepts. Clergy and spiritual leaders need mental health language and concepts. And then I heard you say part of that has to do with an attitude or an expectation and belief of entering into conversation. That is crucial. And I'm going to give a shameless plug here for something that NAMI FaithNet is doing. And NAMI FaithNet is piloting a program, NAMI FaithNet for clergy. And it's looking to do exactly what we're talking about here. It's a six seminar series for clergy on mental health issues using the language and the foundational slides from NAMI's peer-to-peer and connections work group. So basically what we're doing is we're taking the NAMI work and we're turning it over to the religious leaders, exactly recognizing that it's the congregants who go to those leaders first. So we're working on it, much more to be done. My last plug, and I'm going to say this again, is that one of the things about legitimizing discussions about mental health conditions and legitimizing discussions around spirituality is that it will make it easier because our leaders are out in the community. So if we're talking about it and we're using the language, there's some side education going on. Thanks.
Yeah, right here. Go ahead, and then we'll come over there. Yeah.
I was going to kind of comment on how I like how you're kind of seeing it as a whole and having its own spirituality to the biopsychosocial. I'm a clinician myself, and I see whether I'm practicing with, faith in the mix of a session or not. Spirituality is very present because it's either good or bad, right? So there's spirits in the world, and so that's where I feel like it's so vital, because whether a person has faith or religion in their life or spirituality, they're believing these negative spirits. And then in alcohol, because I worked a lot within substance use and mental health, so drinking spirits, right? So it's present, and so I really love how you really want to emphasize like that in its own circle, and kind of emphasizing how it's different. People can have engagement with spirits, but not fully believe. So thank you for that. I felt very passionate about that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Question over here.
My question is, so I'm a clinical director at Genesis Behavioral Health, and we do, a mixture of psychiatry, therapy, TMS, but we also do research and education. You pointed out how in education, they are not always teaching these things and what the research says. And so as we have residents cycling through, as we have PA students and therapy students cycling through, any recommendations you can give to us on how we can help further either research or further education of the kind of new cohort of students that are coming out to be doctors and physician's assistants and therapists?
That's tremendous work that you're doing. That's awesome. I want to hear more about your work. Thank you for asking me. It's hard to offer an opinion without knowing more about your program. Off the top of my head, use as much co-language as you can, and then look at the faces. If you're using words like concepts like generalized anxiety disorder, and you're not seeing recognition, I would encourage you to back it down and talk to the people about feeling activated and on edge and frightened all the time, and then help people draw a line to their spirituality and religion. They'll be able to take that out into the world. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, over here, please.
Yeah, so this goes back a little bit to the earlier question, but you mentioned in your presentation that we as caregivers, it's important that we ourselves receive care. My husband and I serve as clergy in our community,
Thank you.
And my question is, what advice would you give to people like us in terms of the kind of resources that we should be looking into ourselves so we can better serve those in our community?
So the question was, it's linked to my comment about how critical it is that care providers take care of themselves, right? Put your oxygen masks on first on the airplane, right? All right. But the question then becomes, and thank you for your service, both of you, to your communities. The question then becomes, where do you go for that care? Where do you go, right? Because now you're a spiritual leader. Okay, and that's a little bit akin, or can be a little bit akin, to being a psychiatrist or a psychologist and going for therapy. It can be a little bit akin to that. However, the advantage that you have is that you know your colleagues, right? So you have discernment, and you can go to your colleagues and you can say, hey, I'm feeling a little bit worn around the edges here. Do you have time for a cup of coffee? Like that. And then it doesn't become a burden to anybody. It doesn't change your current relationship, right? And in fact, what you're doing is normalizing among your colleagues this idea that you're going to use each other as support. That, off the top of my head, that would be one of the first things I would say. Thank you for asking me.
Great, thank you. Right over here.
Hi, I'm very interested in congregation-based initiatives, and as you mentioned, the literature in this area is pretty poor. There's just not many. Do you have any resources, have you found any resources that could point you towards how to best evaluate such initiatives?
Thank you. So I'm just going to repeat it so that people can hear. Somebody's working on is a congregational faith leader and working.
I'm a researcher.
You're a researcher, okay. I don't want to change your role. You're just, okay, okay.
I'm interested in evaluating congregation-based initiatives.
Congregational-based initiatives wants to know how to evaluate them? Okay, yeah, my brain just went, health services research, no. This kind of research, no. So, yes, it is tough. The thing is if there are no currently existing questionnaires, it means nothing's benchmarked, which means you get to develop it. That's
Yeah.
right. Well, but it's good to know that. Oh yeah.
Doctor, I've got a plug for that. I've got a plug for her.
Oh, there you go.
It's called the Congregational Collective. This is going on here in the city, and the name is Dr. Becca Brune. She's actually here at this conference. She's, I think, leading a seminar this morning as well. She's doing research, data collection, as a part of literally this exactly what you're talking about. Congregations on the front lines of trying to balance mental health and spiritual connections. So yeah, I would look that up. It's here. And again, that's the H.E. Butt Foundation thing I mentioned a moment ago.
What? Repeat the name?
The Congregational Collective, and you could just Google it, and there's stuff on it online that'll readily available.
And the really good thing is, yes, if there's already established questionnaires and things that are benchmarked, and
she's
you're already
done some
there,
data collection in churches, yeah.
Yeah, let's not wheels if they exist. We don't need to redo them, right?
Becca Brune. I think there's a question back there, and then we'll come over here. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Probably one thing worse than being an allopathic physician, being an allopathic surgeon, which is what I am, in terms of being locked into physical models. I'm a urologist, and for the past 20, 25 years, I've developed the idea that so much of what I see actually is born out of trauma, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, and dealing with the whatever type of scars people have, dealing with the physical manifestation. That's the first question that people coming in all the time. I can identify it. I can talk to people who have got it. I'm not going to be their psychological, spiritual, or counselor. And I've made preliminary efforts over the past 20 years trying to help figure out how to develop the right resources to send people to. Where to plug, I can identify it, but the network so that physicians, not only we have to basically develop awareness, but we have to give them a place to be able to go and have that kind of network that gets people to the right. That's kind of what I would love to see develop over the next 5 years.
Resources to refer people to, essentially, is that?
But a way to confidently get someone to actually crack the egg, you've got to get them the right skill.
Yes. What do you?
What sacred .org is primarily for San Antonio?
For those who don't know, SACRED, S-A-C-R-D, you can just look that up, and it's a great kind of online database. I think that might be quite helpful. Okay, I think we have time for one more, then it's lunchtime. Right here, sir. Last one, go ahead.
So, and I will piggyback a little bit off what this gentleman said, because oftentimes in an over-spiritualization, there's a flip side of this coin where a person, if they're in a delusion or psychosis and you're talking about spirits, it's a very confusing, you're going to have this confusion, and they might not have the help here from people who aren't qualified to diagnose, evaluate, but it takes a community and many different resources, and the point of this is hope and restoration of the human being and working together as a community. And I'm wondering how to make that happen for someone who thinks prayer works, because the Pentagon is listening to them, but they need help from clinical help, they need help from the spiritual, they need friends to listen to and care, and not just kind of, oh, here's the next person, and you get lost in the system because there's all these pieces in order to connect with them, and I think this is filling that gap. So how would you use that? Is that a referral list? Do you have case managers?
Yeah, I mean, doctor, you could speak to this as well, but I think the key is knowing the boundary limits of your expertise and walking with the person through the process as you get them to the next level of clinical care. But it's really important, you're right, we can't pretend as pastors, as clergy, that we are capable, competent, and able to do what we need a clinician to do. But the key is working together, staying with them in the journey, right? And I think the last word doctor said today was about, we're trying to offer hope, and I think it's all about hope. So will you join me in giving one last final thank you to Dr. Harris, a wonderful talk today. Thank you.
Have a great conference.